Hello everybody, today's topic is assessment and testing in the classroom. This unit aims to outline the purposes which assessment serves and to describe current practices and trends in assessment in different EFL contexts. Thus, we will distinguish between evaluation, assessment and testing. These concepts of evaluation, assessment and testing seem to differ for different authors. For purpose of this unit, we will use the terms as defined by Harris and McCann in 1994. Evaluation. These concepts involve us looking at the factors that influence the learning process, exam syllabus, objectives, course design, materials, methodology, teacher performance, and assessment. What is assessment? Assessment it involves measuring the performance of our students and the progress that they are making. It helps us to be able to diagnose the problems they have and provide them with useful feedback. This assessment can be of three kinds. First one is informal assessment, formal assessment or testing, and self-assessment. Informal assessment, in this observation of everybody's performance. It is a way of collecting information about our students' performance in normal classroom conditions. It is done without establishing test conditions, such as in the case of formal assessment. We intuitively assess them when speaking, writing, reading, or listening. We can see which students are doing well and which students are having difficulties. We are also aware of attitudes and effort. What is formal assessment? Okay, formal assessment is synonyms of testing, and there are two possible interpretations of it. First one is, it refers to are often called examinations. These examinations are often external, KAT, PAT, etc. They are administered to many students under standardized conditions. They are a broad range of language. They are marked objectively or under standardized subject marking schemes and are likely to be administered at the end of the course. Other authors include all types of language tests under this term. These tests include the kind of tests commonly administered in class by the teacher in order to assess learning. These tests are not as formal as examinations of external bodies, and their scope of action is limited to the context in hand. These tests are often administered to one class for purposes internal to the class. They focus on a narrow range of language. They are assessed either objectively or subjectively. They are done to assess teaching and are often backward-looking. What is self-assessment? Okay, self-assessment refers when the students themselves assess their progress. Dickinson in 1997 says it's particularly appropriate as a complement to self-instruction to build autonomous and self-directed language learners. It could give learners an opportunity to reflect on this or her learning in order to improve it. Do you see any disadvantages on it? Both Dickinson and McCann point the problems associated with the use of self-assessment in classrooms. It cannot work in situations where marks have great intrinsic value and there is competition. The time required to train students to use self-assessment can be significant. Reliability problems. Can students make adequate, fair assessment of their performance? Will many students be tempted to give themselves unfairly high assessments of their performance? In formal assessment, we also have terms summative and formative, introduced by Qurbonboeva in 1967. Formative. This refers to forms of assessment which aim to evaluate the effectiveness of learning at the time during the course. Quizzes in order to make future learning more effective. Summative. The administration of this test may result in some judgment on the learner, such as pass or fail. The amount of contents assessed are usually several. Formal assessment can also refer to test types according to purpose. The main types are listed below. First one, aptitude tests, placement tests, diagnostic tests, progress tests, achievement tests, proficiency tests. Aptitude tests, these are designed to predict who will be a successful learner and are based on factors which are sought to determine the individual's ability to acquire a second or foreign language. They are usually large-scale tests taking a long time to administer and within a number of components, each testing a different facet of language. They are also forward-looking tests concerned with future language learning. Placement tests. These tests are used to make decisions regarding the student's placement into appropriate groups. They tend to be quick to administer and to mark. They are usually administered at the start of a new phase or language course. As a result, students are often put into homogeneous groups for language study according to their present language ability. Diagnostic tests. These tests are usually syllabus-based and they aim to determine the student's areas of strengths and weaknesses in relation to the contents to be covered in the course. Progress tests. These tests are usually written and administered by a class teacher and look back over recent work, perhaps the work of the last lesson or week. They usually therefore test a small range of language. Pop quizzes. Achievement tests. What is achievement? These tests come at the end of a relatively long period of learning, and those cannot derive from the syllabus that has been taught over the period of time. They are usually large-scale tests covering a wide range of language and skills. These tests can be used for a variety of purposes, including promotion to a more advanced course, certification, or as an entry qualification to a job. Proficiency tests. So, these tests are based on a theory of language proficiency and the specific language abilities to constitute language proficiency. They are often related to specific academic professional situations where English is needed, PET, FCE, CE, IELTS, TOEFL, etc. 3 phrases to categorize formal tests and compare them. First generation tests, second generation tests, and third generation tests as well. First generation tests. They are broadly associated with the grammar translation approach to language learning. Candidates are asked to complete various questions such as compositions, translations, or simple questions and answer activities devoid of context. Write about a holiday you enjoyed, 200 words. These are tests evaluate grammar, vocabulary, punctuation, spelling, and discourse structure. They lead to subjective scoring, though these can lead to problems of reliability in marking. The degree of agreement between 2 examiners about a mark for the same language sample is known as inter-rater reliability. The degree of agreement between one single examiner marking the same sample on second separate occasions is known as intra-rater reliability. Both inter and intra-rater reliability is low in first-generation tests. Second-generation tests, where first-generation testing techniques had been marked subjectively, with the associated problems in standardizing marking to ensure fairness. Language items could be assessed objectively through multiple-choice testing of discrete language items. The text could be marked by a non-expert, by different people, or by the same person more than once, and the result would always be the same. Questions in second-generation testing normally measure one item of language, known as discrete point. Since each question tests only tiny aspect of language, X, verb form, prepositions, and etc., These are often very long, so these tests are criticized because they do not sample. Interrogative language is first-generation tests. Third-generation tests. The testing of interrogative language with the use of both objective and subjective testing formats has come together in third-generation tests. These are those tests which have come along the back of developments in communicative language teachings. Thus, communicative tests aim to emulate real-life language use. Recent models of communicative language ability purposes that it consists of both knowledge of language and the capacity of implementing that knowledge in communicative language use. Examples of these tests could be authentic reading with some transfer of information, such as correcting some notes taken from it, or writing a note with instructions about some aspect of household organization, or listening to an airport announcement to find the arrival time of a plane, or giving someone spoken instructions for how to get a certain place. Third-generation techniques are contextualized by their very nature as authentic candidates are asked to do tasks which have clearly reference in reality. These tests assess interrogative language, so they have to be assessed subjectively. Fundamental testing principles. West 1990 gives a good summary of these principles of testing. The principles can be described in pairs. Competence, we see performance. Usage, we see use. Direct, we see indirect. Assessment, discrete point with interrogative assessment. Objective, we see subjective assessment. And receptive, we see productive skills. Backward and forward-looking assessment. Contextualized versus disembodied language. Criterion, reference and non-referenced assesses. Reliability, we see validity. The opposition between members of a pair indicates some sort of tension that exists in language testing in general. Generally, the more that one test conforms to one of the pair, the less likely it is to exhibit characteristics of the other part of the pair. Thus, the more reliable a test is multiple choice, the less valid is it likely to be it tests only discrete items. This opposition corresponds with differences between second and third generation testing. Competence versus performance. Chomsky drew his distinction between the ideal knowledge all mature speakers hold in their mind as competence and the fluid realization of it that comes out in language use, performance. The third generation testing is called performance testing, usage versus use. Widdowson distinguished between language use and language usage. For example, learners whose instruction consists of grammatical rules will be required to produce sentences to illustrate the rules. These sentences are, for Widdowson, examples of usage. Examples of usage can show the learner's current state of competence, but will not necessarily indicate anything about the learner's possible performance. He argues that performance teaching and testing require examples of language use and not usage. Direct vs. indirect assessment testing that assesses competence without eliciting performance is known as indirect testing. Multiple choice testing fits this description, since language is assessed without any production of language use from the learner. Conversely, direct tests use examples of performance as an indicator of communicative competence. These tests use testing tasks of the same type as language tasks in the real world. Backward and forward-looking assessments. Competence-based tests look backwards at the usage-based syllabus to see what degree has been assimilated by the learner. This generation tests are better linked to the future use of language looking forward, and their assessments of real languages also show mastery of performance-based syllabus. Okay, these are all about the assessment and testing system. Thank you for your attention.